Welcome sports fans to GenX Classic Sports, where we bring the nostalgia of our sports-filled youth into the present day. Grab your favorite retro jersey, crack open a cold one, and let's stroll down memory lane together.
Welcome back, everybody, to GenX Classic Sports. I'm your host, Sean Enos, and today we're going to go back to 1994, actually a little before that, into the late 80s. In 1994, I was a student in graduate school, and I heard about this documentary that was coming out. Probably saw a TV commercial back then, maybe saw about it in a magazine, I'm not sure. So I went to a mall. That's right, kids, a mall. You don't see theaters and malls a whole lot anymore, but I went to a mall that had a movie theater in it, and I watched Hoop Dreams. And it was the best sports documentary I'd ever seen at that point, and I don't think anything really has beaten it to this day. It's one of the best, maybe the best maybe the best documentary I've ever seen, sports or not. If you grew up in the late 80s and the early 90s, you'll remember that basketball really created its own culture. It was on the playgrounds, these VHS tapes and highlights on Sports Center that ran on repeat by then. And the belief that if you were good enough, maybe everything would work out for you as well on the basketball court, right? Because this was when the NBA was really growing exponentially and college basketball was super popular like it has been for a long time. So the results of that, it's that a whole generation of kids with Gen X, athletes really wanted to make their living playing basketball. And, you go buy the shoes and you watch the games and you rent the VHS tapes that are the highlights of some championship team or whatever. Remember when you could do that? And so, yeah, basketball was hugely popular and growing. So today on GenX Classic Sports, we're going to go deep on the documentary Hoop Dreams. It's not just a basketball movie or a sports movie. It's one of the most important sports stories ever told, and it's all the more powerful because it was true. Hoop Dreams is a documentary that's not about championships. It's not about buzzer-beating shots, and it definitely wasn't about happy endings necessarily. It shattered a lot of illusions for people, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Talent wasn't enough to go all the way to a pro sports career. And that was really a shockingly hard concept to accept for a lot of wide-eyed kids in the 80s and into the 90s that wanted to grow up and be the next Michael Jordan or Joe Montana or whoever. Talent wasn't enough. And as we will talk about, there are so many more factors. Hoop Dreams, the documentary, really moves around, and it's about that space between a dream and the reality of the situation. And for Gen X, it landed right in the middle of our lives. So let's talk about it. Hoop Dreams came out on October 14th, 1994, and I was in the theaters within a week or two of that for sure. It was directed by a guy named Steve James, and it was written by Steve James and Frederick Marks. It is almost 3 hours long, 171 minutes. So yeah, I sat through all of that in a theater by myself. So like all of our stories we talk about here, to understand Hoop Dreams, you got to remember where basketball was when this film was made. I say made, not released. It was released in 1994. It was made in the late 80s. What was going on then? Well, Magic and Larry Bird and Isaiah ran the NBA at that point. Michael Jordan was a rising NBA legend about to hit his peak and stay there, of course, for years, for over a decade easily. ESPN was turning highlights into, these mythological stories and people. College basketball felt bigger than the NBA at that point in life, to some people at least. For the real diehard college basketball people, it was bigger. And the phrase next big thing, of course, was out there. Every kid that came through junior high was the next big thing, right? So for Gen X kids, basketball felt like the most accessible dream for making it to the pros. It did. And I believe that. And I feel that way because this was the first time a whole generation wanted to play basketball so badly. You didn't need pads. You didn't need any expensive equipment. You needed a ball and a hoop and a little bit of belief, man. And that's what you needed to play basketball. What Hoop Dreams, the documentary, did really effectively and really quietly, it asked the question that, at that time in popular entertainment, it didn't happen a whole lot. But the question that it asked is critical to our discussion. And that question was, what happens to the kids who do everything right and they still don't make it? And that is the crux of what Hoop Dreams is all about. Now, maybe one of the reasons that Hoop Dreams as a documentary feels so real, I mean, it's a documentary, it's supposed to feel real, but maybe for this one as well, it's because it really wasn't supposed to be this in the first place. The director, the Steve James guy, he originally planned to make a short film about Chicago playground basketball. So just a 30-minute thing for PBS around 1987. So this was just going to be a little quick thing about the culture around hoops on the playgrounds there in Chicago. And think about that for a minute. This was 1987. Right across town, this was happening on playgrounds from where the best basketball player on the planet was just a couple of years into his NBA career. So let's not lose sight of that. And the juxtaposition of Michael Jordan being young and just becoming a star and, driving his Corvette back then he drove a Corvette, driving his Corvette to practice every day. And then this video about these kids playing in the projects, playing on playgrounds, really interesting topic to me. But once the camera started rolling, filming all these kids play ball on the playground, dozens of kids. When they started shooting hoops against each other, 2 kids immediately stood out to the filmmakers. Their names were William Gates and Arthur Agee. So instead of weeks or months, the filmmakers, they very wisely made a decision. They decided to follow these 2 guys and document their upcoming careers wherever the careers led. They filmed Gates and Agee for 5 full years from middle school to early adulthood, and they ended up with 250 hours of footage that they pared down into this almost 3-hour documentary. Think about the famous Friday Night Lights book and movie, and think about how that author, Buzz Bissinger, just followed a football team around in Odessa for 1 season. He followed them for 1 season, and what kind of an impact that made on our culture. This was 5 years of following middle school kids into their college ages. So this was groundbreaking in that regard, if nothing else. And when I'll call it a movie. It's not fiction. It's a documentary. So if I say movie, you know what I'm talking about. Now, in preparation for the podcast, I actually rewatched Hoop Dreams. It's on HBO right now. And I just rewatched it, and something about it had always struck me as kind of odd, and I couldn't put my finger on it. But I realized that Hoop Dreams is unusual in that it has very little narration. It does have narration, but out of 3 hours, there's so little actually said by an actual filmmaker or narrator type. So it's only enough, they only talk enough to make sure that you kind of understand the jumps in time when they're moving along in the story. So it's very minimal. So think about that. Any questions asked of the participants are off camera, and the camera just observes, which means so does the audience. And there's no expert narrator telling you what to think. It's just life for these people unfolding in real time. And that decision to follow Gates and Agee for their entire prep careers changed sports documentaries forever. So let's meet our 2 kids who had these dreams of being hoop stars. William Gates was the prodigy from the Cabrini Green projects. He was recruited by every high school in Chicago. And you said, what did you say? High school? Yes, high school. When he was a middle schooler, every high school in Chicago and beyond wanted him to play for them. He had you can see from the footage, he's very smooth. As you can see from the practice and game footage in the documentary, the guy just kind of glides around and does his thing. And he at the time was already labeled as a youngster as one of these, quote, can't miss type of kids. Okay. And he's recruited ultimately to attend a private high school that's 90 minutes away from home out in the suburbs. And that high school is St. Joseph High School, coached by a guy you'll see in the documentary a lot if you haven't seen it. And his name is Gene Pingatore, head coach Gene Pingatore. And Coach Pingatore and the St. Joseph High School, this is the same high school in the Chicago suburbs. It's the same high school and the same coach that produced Isaiah Thomas back in the 70s. And so this is a private prep school, Catholic prep school, I believe, but Gates attends on an athletic scholarship. Make no mistake about it. You know, tuition waived for a guy on an athletic scholarship, which we still see today. That wasn't a big deal at the time because that still happens, and it was happening then. And for Gates, because he was the next big thing, the expectations were really huge on this kid's shoulders. All right. Now, our other kid is Arthur Agee, who lives in West Garfield Park. And Arthur is undersized at the time. He's less polished. He's wild on the court. You can just tell by watching the video. He's kind of wild. A lot of energy, but kind of wild. He's farther away from the spotlight, okay, than William Gates is at this point in life. He's also recruited to St. Joseph High School. And there's a whole story about how they are recruited to a high school. And I'll let you watch the movie to see that for yourself. I'm not going into that here. It's not important to our discussion, but he's also recruited to St. Joseph. So he also receives a scholarship to play basketball. And he also has a 90-minute commute one way every day to the school. We're talking about, for him and William, we're talking about multiple trains and buses and some walking to get there every single day. Okay. And I don't remember if they practiced before school or not, but if they practiced before school, which usually starts around 8 o'clock, can you imagine how early these guys were getting up and spending 90 minutes to get there? So that tells you how badly they wanted to be there and how great of an opportunity it was to have tuition paid for at what I think was mentioned in the movie, and it was pretty obvious, a pretty good school with good academics. And Arthur's story, it feels a little closer to home for most of us. You know, he's grinding, man, and he's overlooked a lot compared to some of the people around him. And he's constantly, it feels like, your heart aches for this kid early on because he constantly feels like he's one bad thing from happening away from being forgotten. Like, it's clear early on he's not as put together as William, and I'll leave it at that. So these two kids represent, the two of them, two sides of that same dream, man. They both want to get to the NBA. And the whole movie unfolds to show you the two very different paths they both take through the system. So let's talk about, and I'm not going to hit every plot point. That's boring, I know, but I have to tell you what happens in the movie to some degree. I want you to go find it for yourself. But so here's basically what happens. In their freshman year is really where the story picks up. They both enter St. Joseph for their first year, their freshman year. And Gates, like I told you, he's so smooth and polished. And even though Pingatore rides his butt constantly, which Pingatore seems to do to every player. Pingatore is one of these, I don't know. I don't want to say a Bobby Knight type. I didn't see him going that crazy, but he's tough. He's tough to play for. He does that to every player. He rides every player's butt, it would appear. But Gates ultimately is honored enough to become a starter on the varsity as a freshman, which is a really big deal and a rare honor there at St. Joseph. So he's branded by the fans, the media, whoever. He's branded as the next Isaiah Thomas, which is just crazy. That's too much pressure on a kid. So that freshman season, St. Joseph makes the postseason, but they fall short in what they call their super sectionals. In Illinois basketball, at least when this was made, they all try to get to the state tournament, which is what they call downstate at Champaign, Illinois, at the University of Illinois on their campus. So everybody's trying to get through all their various city leagues, Catholic leagues, sectionals, and everything else to try to get to the state. So St. Joseph falls in the super sectionals. Meanwhile, Arthur Agee can't seem to do anything right to please Pingatore. And I'm telling you, it's pretty clear right off, that Arthur's body is maybe a little bit, or his brain's a little bit ahead of his body, because he's a little more awkward on the court and a little wild and stuff. He struggles in the classroom and on the court, and that's pretty clear early on. Pingatore seems to see him as very talented, but just too wild and undisciplined. And Pingatore thinks he needs way more discipline in his system of how he wants to play basketball. So Agee spends the season on the freshman team only. And so you got William not only on the varsity, but starting as a freshman, you got Arthur Agee. He's playing on the freshman team only. And I didn't make note of when it happened, okay? But at some point, Arthur Agee is either kicked off the team or his grades aren't good enough. And I can't remember, maybe he's kicked off the team because of his grades. I can't remember. But he gets his scholarship pulled for one of those reasons. And his parents are so desperate for him to continue at the school for academic reasons, like what it will do for his life if he can just get a high school degree from St. Joseph and maybe work his way back into the good graces of Pingatore. They're so wanting him to do that they show up for the school and they agree to this payment plan to pay his tuition now that he's lost his scholarship. So they set up payments, and basically they kick him out of school when his parents fall behind on their payments. Ultimately, Agee is kicked out by the end of the school year, and his family then enrolls him back into the Chicago public school system where he would have gone had he not been out at St. Joseph. And Gates, of course, meanwhile, remains on scholarship because of his success on the court, and he's doing just enough academically that's not an issue either. In their sophomore years, Agee goes to the public school system, and he continues his career as a sophomore at John Marshall High School, coached by one of my favorite people in the whole movie. He's coached by a guy at John Marshall named Luther Bedford, Coach Bedford at John Marshall High School. And to me, Coach Bedford is a hero in this story because he really does his best to shoot it straight to his players at all times. He tries to shoot it straight to them. And unlike Pingatore, who seems really cagey and evasive at times, not only with the documentary crew, but with his own players. So Gates continues as a starter, as a sophomore, and at St. Joseph's, once again, they fall short of their expectations his sophomore year. I'm not saying they had a losing record. They lost in the postseason in the sectional finals this time. And after that, we start to see a little bit of the stress that Gates has put upon himself and others around him have put on him. And the kid looks like he's carrying around the weight of the world besides the weight of the high school program. And he's trying to fulfill his own destiny. And it all starts to be a lot of pressure on this kid. There's a side story I'm not going to get into, but there's a side story with Gates's brother that's critical to the story as well. I didn't go into all that for you guys, but there's a story with his older brother. Now, at the same time, sophomore year for Agee, he gets a little tough love from Coach Bedford, and you can start to see as a sophomore some progress with him. Maybe his brain and his body are finally on the same page. You start to see a little bit happening for him on the court. And the John Marshall team is not very good that season, but you can see that Arthur, I guess, away from Pingatore, maybe growing a little bit, maybe getting the kind of coaching he needs from Coach Bedford. He starts getting better. You can see that happening. Now let's talk about their junior year. William Gates suffers a knee injury in his junior year, and that knee injury required surgery and rehab. At the same time, Arthur's home life starts unraveling quite a bit And that's a theme in the story. There's a lot of footage of Arthur's home life with his parents. And I'm not going into all of that, but I will say that there's some things happening that year. His dad, whose name is Bo, walks out on the family and becomes addicted to drugs. His mom loses her job. I mean, the family ends up on welfare and struggling quite a bit. And as it would any kid, this causes Arthur to struggle a lot as well. And so at some point, luckily, his dad, Bo, returns. His mom gets some kind of a nursing certification or degree or something that enables her to get a job in healthcare. And so his family life is kind of up and down this junior year. And to be honest, it's up and down throughout this whole movie for different reasons I'm not going into, but there's a lot going on with Arthur's family. Now, Arthur's basketball team, John Marshall, they surprisingly show big improvement his junior season. And they score at one point in the movie, they score a huge upset over a team called Dunbar Vocational High School. And that was a big deal when it happened. And so Arthur's improving on the court and John Marshall is improving as a team. Gates, meanwhile, he's rehabbing that knee and he returned in time to play a little bit in the postseason. And St. Joseph makes it to the sectional finals again, and they lose to a team, Gordon Tech, who had beat them out the previous year. So now they've been deep into the sectionals 2 years in a row, lost to the same team. And what really made it bad was Gates is out there on a bad knee, or rehabbing knee, and he probably played too soon, but he missed 2 crucial free throws in that game, and they ended up bounced out of the playoffs, partly due to that. And so, of course, here we are. Poor Gates. You can see it in this kid's eyes sometimes, the pressure that he's under. And so one team's improved a lot, and Arthur's improved. Poor Gates has been hurt, and his team has fallen short of expectations yet again. And so that sets up their senior years. Okay, going into their senior year, Gates, despite that knee injury, he's recruited by some D1 schools, and he ends up signing his letter of intent with Marquette University, committing to Marquette. Arthur, he's playing at John Marshall in the public school system. He's still finding his way, on the court. He has a little bit of interest going into his senior year from some junior colleges. Not much, just a couple. So here's what happens their senior year. And here's the twist that you don't see coming. And I'm telling you here, this movie's been out 30 years. So, come on, get over it. So Gates returns, presumably healthy, their senior year for his last campaign at St. Joseph. But they are tossed out of the postseason much earlier than expected and never even make it to the state championship tournament yet again. So in Gates' 4 years, they've not gone down to state the entire time, which was the goal for Pingator's teams always. And here's the actual twist. Arthur is on fire that season, and so is the John Marshall team. And they tear their way through the Chicago Public High School League and win the city championship. Arthur plays out of his mind, it seems. There's lots of good footage of how hyped up their crowds are and how big their games are and how John Marshall's just winning game after game. And you can see them putting it together right there in front of your eyes. So instead of St. Joseph and Gates, it's Arthur and John Marshall who go to the state tournament down in Champaign by way of their city championship. Okay. And ultimately, you do get a lot of footage at the state tournament, and ultimately John Marshall ends up third in the state, which is a huge accomplishment for John Marshall High School and their coach Bedford and Arthur as well. And Arthur has a really good season for them. And you can see Arthur has matured as a player so much on the court that season. Now, that's just the basketball stuff and very little about the family drama and some problems both guys had with academics at times, and a lot of other things happening around their living situations, their families. Just trust me. I've only covered the basketball part. There's just so much more to this. And there's a lot of great footage of these games that they're playing in and some of their practices and things. And so check it out just to be able to not only hear me talk about this, but to actually see the movie and see these guys moving around on the court. And there's plenty of really gripping story elements within this outside of the basketball stuff. And I just made a decision not to go into all that because, but if you do watch it, you'll have a bigger appreciation for what these guys get accomplished on the court because of all the stuff they're dealing with as teenagers at home. So at the end of the documentary, we get some sight of what these two are up to after high school, and we leave with Arthur going off to a JUCO in Missouri, and Gates is off to Marquette University, of course, in Milwaukee. And so that's more or less where it leaves off their playing careers. There's actually a little blurb at the end, I think an update right before credits roll, where it does mention that Arthur, I think at the end, I think it mentions it. Anyway, Arthur ended up playing in Arkansas at Arkansas State University up in Jonesboro. Now, so let's talk about things other than basketball. At some point in this documentary, Hoop Dreams really isn't so much about sports anymore. It becomes something a lot heavier. This film, for a lot of people, because this was pre-internet, exposed the ecosystem around elite youth basketball in our country. Prep schools that chase championships by recruiting, out of the inner cities or recruiting anywhere. Recruiters who circle quietly on these playgrounds and find these kids and promise them things that may or may not happen. Families carrying the financial pressures like you see with Arthur when he loses his scholarship. Academics perhaps treated like as a secondary issue until all of a sudden the schools need to weaponize academics against the kids if they have to, and you'll see what I'm talking about. And, there's no one person that they point to as some, villain twirling his curly mustache. It's not that kind of deal. It's a system, okay? This really exposed these institutions that benefit from what these kids believe in, okay? These kids have starry-eyed visions of being the next Isaiah or Michael Jordan or whoever, and these early involvements in the recruiting process before they're even thinking about college, really, that's what this is about. It's about that system that gets them to the opportunity to play pro ball. And these kids believe that this dream, of course, is real and that the system is fair and that someone's always going to be watching out for them. And spoiler alert, that's really not the case. And hardly anyone is at any point, okay? And the people who want to can't do anything about it. Another way to look at it is perhaps how that life and that system can chew people up and spit them out, okay? One of the hardest things to watch is how quickly momentum disappears for both of the guys in this movie. An injury and then the rehab, a grade slipping here and there, a family crisis, and just suddenly phone calls might stop, opportunities might vanish, the dream quietly and sometimes loudly, really, it depends. It moves on to somebody else. And I've had this conversation with people before because more than one ex-college or ex-pro athlete, more than one has told me that they got hurt at some point and the response from either a college or pro coach was basically, you better get back right physically because there's a line around the block of people who can do what you do. And the people are told this not out of any kind of spite or emotion or anything because it's a business. Even at the college level, it's a business. And so your elbow hurts, you hurt your elbow from pitching. Well, I've got 5 more that look just like you in the bullpen. Your knee's messed up and you're trying to run the football. Well, I got 5 more running backs. I mean, that's the harsh reality. And it's not just injuries. It's the grades. It's something at home pulling you away that you can't help. It's all kinds of stuff, okay? So that's what happens in Hoop Dreams. You're sitting there. You have no narration, so you're just observing and listening. And it forces you to sit there with those moments in the movie where there's no cues from the dramatic music and no dramatic editing. It's just stone silent in places, and it's uncomfortable. And I think that's the point of what these guys were aiming for, okay? And, it depends on who you are. A lot of people love college basketball, and as an athlete, that's their ultimate dream. They figure if it ends there, so be it. And a lot of kids are disillusioned enough with the one and done and all that they think, man, if I just got to do some minimal things to make that hop to the NBA. So back then, a lot of players, hey, college basketball was the dream. The NBA was, this mythical place, but a scholarship and all that, hey, that was attainable. That could be the reward. I can do my work in middle school and high school. And even if the NBA is maybe out of reach, a scholarship's doable. Hey, I can be on national TV. There's March Madness ahead of me. So those kinds of things, even if you fell short of being Michael Jordan as an NBA player, hey, the reward still should have been getting to college, right? And having those other perks happen. So the film shows that even that level of success is fragile. And there's so much about grades and health and timing and politics that factors into these kids, whether they're trying to play college or pro ball. But they first have to get out of high school and take the next step. And so this movie is about that, but it's also about getting to the high school even. There's plenty in here about that. So when Hoop Dreams came out, it really took the world by storm. It was universally praised by critics. And so many of them, like the two big critics at the time were Siskel and Ebert. Okay, both of them rest in peace. But they were the show you watched to find out if a movie was any good or not, even if you didn't agree with them. They both gave it 2 enthusiastic thumbs up, which was what they trademarked the thumbs up. They gave it 2 thumbs up, and both of them called it the best film of 1994, not the best documentary, the best film period of 1994. Ebert went so far as to call it one of the best films about American life that he had ever seen, and this was a guy that had saw tens of thousands of movies. Despite the fact that critics loved it, and it went on the independent film circuit and won all these festivals and awards and things, this movie was not nominated for Best Documentary at the Oscars, and it's actually famous for the fact that it got snubbed by the Oscars, okay? And the backlash to that was pretty severe. Critics really doubled down on how good it was, and they showered it with awards everywhere it went, even though it wasn't awarded by, the Oscars. It wasn't even nominated. And actually, that kind of helped cement its legacy. The fact that it got snubbed probably made it more popular, if you want to know the truth. It became a symbol of how documentaries were undervalued as entertainment, and it was a turning point in how sports films were taken seriously. Okay, this is heavy subject matter. There's not a ton of laughs in this. It's just observing something that at times gets to be really heavy. That's it. And so many people argued, well, the Oscar snub actually did them some good. And that's probably true. Probably did more for them than an Oscar win ever would. Now, to me, this is the ultimate award you can get for putting a piece of art out there in the world, honestly, especially a movie. In 2005, Hoop Dreams was added to the National Film Registry of the Library of Congress, meaning they will have it preserved forever. So when you make that list, you've done something that impacts culture tremendously. So without Hoop Dreams, there's no NFL Hard Knocks. There's no 30 for 30. There's no Last Chance U. There's none of this athlete-first storytelling that we see nowadays. It proved that sports stories don't need a lot of narration. They need patience by the audience. It also changed how fans watch the game. After Hoop Dreams, you just couldn't see the kid at the end of the bench the same way again, or the player who might have peaked too early, or the human cost behind all those highlights. and the money involved and the parents involved and the family situation, all of that, it put a spotlight on all of that. It got it off the court. Yeah, the on the court stuff is there as well, but it put such a spotlight on all the things that it takes to make it to the court. So even though I didn't want to tell you exactly what happened to the guys' basketball careers. I told you one left for Marquette and one left for JUCO at the end of their senior seasons. But let me tell you what happened for them in life, because that's more important. William Gates received his degree in communications from Marquette University in 1999, so he got his degree. Arthur Agee, after his playing days, he started a foundation which promotes higher education for inner city youth. And for more updates on their families, just on their situations as players, just watch the documentary. I don't want to mention that here. Both guys, after the fact, were paid $200,000 to be in this movie. So because of because of the lack of NIL, because of NCAA rules back then, the money became available to them while they were in college, and so the filmmakers put it wherever it needed to be in a trust or something, so they couldn't get access to it and ruin their NCAA eligibility. But rest assured, the movie did well at the box office, and rest assured that these two guys, they got paid for their trouble. I don't know how much money the movie actually made after 5 years of filming. Probably not. I mean, I know it did well, but I don't know. I just know that they got paid, which is good to hear. For me, it feels like Hoop Dreams could have been filmed last week. Why? Because it feels more relevant now. Even though it didn't mention some of these things by name, they're all issues swirling around the world of sports. The AAU culture, the travel ball, the expenses related to that and the money, the social media pressure, NIL money, and image branding, and all of those things that we see around us left and right now. Even those weren't the specific issues shown in this documentary, you can see how now they've impacted what was going on top of what was going on back then, okay? So nowadays, of course, the dream is louder, meaning these kids, they tell you immediately that they have their sights set on the NBA, and they have social media to do so. And the machine is a lot faster for them now. These guys are expected to mature quickly on and off the court. And the odds, though, that's what's important here. The odds are still brutal, man. And the core truth of all this is that talent opens the door, but it doesn't guarantee anything. And I think that's what made this documentary so impactful on people. It doesn't guarantee anything. So once again, for Gen X, Hoop Dreams arrived at the perfect moment. As painful as it was to watch, we were old enough to understand it. We were young enough to feel it. And it didn't keep my generation from, dreaming about doing the same things. I mean, the NBA was still a dream for a lot of kids from Gen X. But it showed us the cost of believing and following that dream for sure. And that's why Hoop Dreams isn't just one of the greatest basketball documentaries ever made. It's one of the most honest sports films ever made, period. And that is the story of the documentary Hoop Dreams. And I hope you all find it on some some streaming service that you're already paying for and you don't have to spend any money to check it out. I see it on, the different ones every now and then, HBO or it might be on Tubi or something that's free like that, but try to check it out if you can get your hands on it. It's a really, really, really interesting watch. I just touched the edges of it here, folks. I gave you an idea of the basketball side of it, but you need to watch it. There's so much more that goes on in that documentary. So I appreciate you sitting through Hoop Dreams and a discussion about it with me, 40 minutes of your life or so. Hey, look, give us a like, give us a share. Give us a comment and tell people about us. Get those numbers up for me. I would appreciate it. And we will be back next week with a little bit more basketball content. This is your host, Sean Enos. Thank you very much for listening to us here on GenX Classic Sports.
Thank you for joining us on GenX Classic Sports, where nostalgia meets the thrill of the game. Tune in next time for more insightful discussions and memorable moments brought to you by Pine Street Productions. Until then, stay passionate about sports and keep the memories alive.